so before I get underway with my formal traditional introduction, I want to note that I always encourage class, if you guys want to dance at your desk during the countdown, you can. Mrs. LaForge's class is the first class ever to do a full wave in the background, so bravo to you. Everyone was really groovy with that, but that was amazing. Thank you for starting my day that way. All right, my name is Jesse. I'm here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and for those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, if you've been joining us for our cross-Canada virtual road trip, you'll know that this is like our signature series. We've done this for 4 straight years in a partnership with the amazing folks at Parks Canada, the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, to showcase and celebrate the coolest places, not just in Canada, but pretty much around the world. We've had the chance to go to Nunavut, to BC, to the East Coast where I am, just all sorts of places, coast to coast to coast, across this really special and gigantic country that we have, to feature cultural stories, biodiversity stories, geology, and more. It's been so much fun. Everything we do is on our YouTube channel, so if you want to check out the whole series, I really encourage you to. There's so much to learn and discover. Now, today, I'm so thrilled to be welcoming back Amber Gibson. She is an old pro in our cross-Canada virtual road trip, and today, she's joining us in the Mingan Archipelago in Quebec, and what she's going to be talking about is fantastic fossils. Now, you guys know this. There are over 700 of you from coast to coast to coast that signed up for today, because fossils are cool. Let's face it. I love fossils. I was going to be a paleontologist as a kid. Something about cracking open a rock and seeing something that no one has ever seen of a creature that might be long extinct from planet Earth is pretty much tantamount to magic. And so today, specifically, we're going to be learning about fossils of creatures that are twice as old as dinosaurs, which is ridiculous. So I'm so excited to turn you over to Amber. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you so much for joining us in our cross-Canada virtual road trip, Amber, and take us away. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here joining us today to talk about fossils. My name is Amber Gibson. I'm the Public Education and Outreach Officer for the Mingan Archipelago National Park Reserve on the North Shore of Quebec. I have brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a forest green Parks Canada uniform with a beaver on one side. Now, if you're wondering, where is the Mingan Archipelago? It's on the North Shore of Quebec. About a 14-hour drive northeast of Montreal, so just to the Labrador border. I hope you're ready. We're going to do some time traveling. We're going to travel back in time 465 million years in the past. The planet was way different from ours right now. This is before the internet, before the creation of Canada, before the start of our calendar, and even before the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were here about 250 million years ago. We're going way past that. We're going to the ancient Ordovician Sea. We're also going to see how our fossils formed, how we can identify them, and who are their descendants that might still be around today here on the planet. So let's start with, what is a fossil? A fossil is a remain, a trace, or an impression of an organism, usually preserved in sedimentary rock that lived in prehistoric times. Now, for this definition, I want to keep a few key words in mind. So we've got organisms and sedimentary rock. An organism, it can be many things. It can be a shell, like a seashell that we find on the beach. It could be teeth, for example, too. Now, this isn't a species that we'll find here in the Mingan Archipelago, but this is a tooth, a fossilized tooth of a megalodon. This was found down in Florida, so not here, but still very, very cool. Brought it to show you an example of a megalodon tooth. Yay, Meg twins, Jesse. It could also be bones, it could be insects, or it could even be entire animals. Now, when we're talking about sedimentary rock, these are made from sediments, or tiny, teeny fragments that are often found in layers called stratigraphic layers. Now, I've got a really big piece of rock right here. This is an example of sedimentary rock that we have here in the Mingan Archipelago. And you can see there's these lines that run across the sedimentary rock, and those are the different layers of sediments. And if I flip this over, oh, what do we got there? We've got a fossil right in the middle of it. And that's why we're going to find so many fossils here in the Mingan Archipelago. A good part of the Mingan Archipelago is made up of sedimentary rocks. So we have a massive diversity of these beautiful fossils here. Now, let's talk about types of fossils. There are 4 main types of fossils. There are petrified fossils, molded fossils, preserved fossils, and cast fossils. Petrified fossils, we'll start there. These are the remains of organisms that hardened during the fossilization process. So much, they turn to stone. So when the organism is buried in sediment and then the nutrient-rich liquids are able to move through the porous rock, like limestone, which is porous, it becomes filled with minerals that will then preserve it. Our next one are molded fossils. So this is kind of like when we put a popsicle mold in the freezer. So let's say your shell is covered in sediment and it slowly dissolves away. It's going to leave a space behind it, so it makes a mold. Now, in the future, if some other sediment or liquid gets into that mold, it could harden and become a fossil if we're really lucky. Now, preserved fossils is our third type. This is the rarest form of fossil. This process is going to preserve a lot of the soft body parts of animals. So if you've seen Jurassic Park, this is how we extracted our dino DNA from amber, the insects that were preserved in amber. So don't worry, this couldn't actually happen in real life. So that's what preserved fossils are. Finally, trace fossils. Now, trace fossils are usually fossils that are not body fossils. So these aren't a part of the body of an organism. These are going to be things that give us clues usually about the behavior of an animal. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen a wet patch of cement. If someone were to accidentally or on purpose walk through a wet patch of cement, it's going to leave a footprint. That's what a trace fossil is. It's how a cast fossil works. So another example of a trace fossil would be fossilized poop. A dinosaur, for example, usually carnivorous dinosaurs, we found fossilized poop for them. And tends to be more carnivorous dinosaurs that we find fossilized poop, or coprolites is the real term for that, because what they're eating decomposes a little bit slower. So that's why we'll find less plant-eating fossilized poop examples. But no dinosaurs here in the Mingan Archipelago. We're going way back, like I said earlier. So before we do that, I want to switch over to our cell phone cam real quick, Jesse. Let's try this out here.
Try it out. And by the way, as you keep highlighting things, I know some of these terms might be unfamiliar to some of our younger classes, so I'll try and bring up all the scientific and technical terms as we go along throughout the broadcast. If there's anything that you missed that you want some clarification on, just email us at exploringbytheseatofyourpants. We will absolutely get you that info. Let's head to Amber and check it out. Here we go.
Are we able to see this?
We are indeed. You are golden. Let's take it away.
Amazing. So I wanted to show you this beautiful example. Hang on. I'm going to mute my microphone over here because I hear myself in double. Okay. This is the ancient Ordovician Sea, 465 million years ago. And these are the different animals and organisms I'm going to introduce you to today. So I want you to look carefully here. We've got all different kinds of animals. We've got cephalopods right here. Over here, we've got some brachiopods, we've got trilobites, we've got corals, we have about 7 different species. And as we look through our real fossils today, I want you to keep in mind what these may have looked like in the past. So we'll go ahead and switch back to our main cam now.
Perfect. As he's pulling it up, again, we're just going to be highlighting, going back and forth between our camera and sort of iPad today. So stay tuned with us as we make those little transitions. But Amber's back with us, and we'll learn a little bit more about those individual creatures. Hey, Amber.
Thank you, Jesse. So how are fossils formed? Before I introduce you to those animals, those organisms that lived in the ancient Ordovician Sea, we kind of want to know how a fossil is formed. And there's a few different ways that we can make fossils, but we're going to go really simple here. We're going to need 4 things for our recipe to make a fossil. We need an organism, we need sediments, we need for those organisms to be covered really, really quickly by that sediment, and we need time. We need a lot of time to make a fossil. In the Mingan Archipelago here, we can find sponges, bryozoans, corals, brachiopods, gastropods, trilobites, and cephalopods. So we're going to go over each of those right now. I'm going to introduce you to each of those different organisms and show you real fossils for them. So let's start with sponges. So I've got this absolutely beautiful example of a fossilized sponge right here. I'm just kidding. This is a real sponge. Here's the real sponge right here, the real fossilized sponge. So sponges are multicellular animals that are very, very different from humans. They don't have a nervous system or a circulatory system or true organs like humans do. So this sponge right here, we can see it's kind of rounded and it has a bit of a dip going down right here. And a lot of the fossilized sponges that we have here in the Mingan Archipelago tend to have this shape. And it would be really, really easy to see this on the ground in the park reserve and think, oh, that's just a normal rock. So sometimes you have to have a really keen eye to be able to spot these fossils. So what do? What do sponges do? They eat microscopic food in the water, and there's between 5,000 and 10,000 different species of sponges. They'd create these large colonies that would help construct the reefs in the shallow seas. I apologize, there's a boat coming into the harbor, so that's what you just heard. I am right beside the harbor right now, so the fishing boats are coming in and out. All right, so what are the descendants of the sea sponge? Sea sponges. The descendants of the fossilized sponges that we just saw are sea sponges that we still see in the sea today on Earth. All right, our next creature is bryozoans and corals. There's a lot of similarities, but some differences between these two different species. So I'll show you the corals first. So here is an example of fossilized coral. And it does look kind of like just a normal rock, but it's got a lot of rough edges and a lot of little teeny tiny holes in it that can tell it apart from just a normal rock. So that's the coral. Now the bryozoans, they can look pretty different. I've got two different examples here. This one has kind of these little, almost like a pattern on the surface of it. Really, really pretty. So that's one example of a bryozoan. And another example kind of looks like a little plant branch. Almost like a little tree branch right there. Same thing for this guy right here. That was that first one we saw earlier. So those would be examples of bryozoans. So both of these are tiny animals that can form these very large colonies to create massive underwater reefs. Bryozoans, they're going to be able to live in really deep waters, while corals, we're going to find them in shallower coastal waters. Now, both of them will secrete calcium carbonate, which is what's going to make up a lot of their form. Their descendants, they have descendants on Earth today, are bryozoans and corals. So the same thing that they used to be, but they've evolved over time. This is an example of some modern day coral. Now it's all dried up, but this did come from the Mingan Archipelago here. So you can see it's a very similar texture to that initial coral, just a little bit bigger in structure. Pretty cool. Now, some of these we'll find in white now, and some of them we'll find in red, the modern corals. So this isn't a fossil. This one right here is a coral that just dried up fairly recently compared to the fossil. You can see it's a very different color. Okay, let me get out my next fossils right here. Our next fossils are Brachiopods. Now, Brachiopods are shells on feet. They started to show up about 550 million years ago. Now, a shell on a foot, what is a shell on a foot? I really want to imagine like a clamshell or a seashell that has two sides to it and that opens like this. That's what a brachiopod is. Now, it's going to have a foot on the bottom that's going to help it stay fixed to one place. They use an organ to eat that's going to sift through the seawater, eating little tiny particulate matter and also capturing oxygen at the same time. There once was probably about 25,000 species of brachiopods historically, but it's gone down a lot over the years. So now on Earth, there's only 350 species that are still living today. These brachiopods will start out as larvae floating in the sea, traveling with the currents, and as they mature, they'll anchor to the seafloor with their foot. So I'll go ahead and show you two different examples of brachiopods. They're really, really small. So this is actually the biggest one that I have to show you. You can see that's one half of the brachiopod shell. And this one is even tinier. It's so small. It's about the size of my pinky fingernail. It's really, really tiny. My favorite way to show these little teeny tiny brachiopods is in a bag. So this right here is a bag of about 100 brachiopod fossils, and it gives us a bit of an idea of how small they are. They have descendants on Earth. Can you guess what those descendants might be? Any guesses? They're pretty similar to those old brachiopods. We're looking. Go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to say new brachiopods.
New brachiopods, exactly. So new brachiopods like oysters and mussels. So this is a blue mussel that I just collected on the beach very recently. And these are the great children of those ancient brachiopods many times over. All right. Now we're getting into our bigger organisms, our organisms that you may recognize a little bit easier. Next up, we've got the gastropods. So gastropods are mollusks, like snails, with a spiral shell. So here's an example of a gastropod fossil. It looks really like a snail shell. And most of these guys ate seaweed and sponges, but some species of gastropods were carnivorous. There was a massive diversity of gastropods, and there still is a lot of gastropods that live on Earth today. So we can count at least 60,000 different species. Some of them are marine species, and some of them are terrestrial species, which means they live on Earth. Who are their descendants? Well, modern day gastropods, like this guy right here. This is another marine gastropod that we find here in the Mingan Archipelago, and this is a whelk shell. Really, really pretty shell. So he's got lots of different descendants here. Our next fossil, our second to last species we're going to see today. And after that, if we have enough time, I'm going to take you around and look at lots of different examples of fossils that I've got behind me and on my table here in front. So our next species is the trilobite. The trilobite. I'm not sure. I don't know. Have you seen these guys before? This one is all rolled up. Trilobites are a species of arthropod. They're really closely related to crustaceans, to spiders, and to some insects. Their name is going to refer to the three different portions of their body. So tri for three, trilobite. They have a shell that was hard like a crustacean, and they were the first animal in this era to have complex eyes to be able to see their prey with. And there was a huge diversity of trilobites during this period, but they disappeared due to a lot of different factors. The last glaciation also impacted a lot of the species at the time. So the trilobites are the only species today that I'm showing you that have no descendants. There are no descendants of the trilobite. This is another example right here. We can see one half of that trilobite, and I'll show you a couple more after we see our last species. Finally, last but not least, is the great cephalopod, the great marine predator of his time. This guy was the top of its food chain. They have extremely complex brains, big eyes, and these long tentacles to be able to catch their prey. Look at that one right there. This one's actually pretty small, but it's the biggest one that I can pick up. But I'll show you some bigger ones behind me in not too long. And this is a really cool example of one. We can actually see there's some mineralization in there, some calcium carbonate minerals that are a little bit shinier than the rest. And we can see that shell has almost like a spiral, almost looks like a screw that you would find at a hardware store in its shape. So these are the big predators of their time. Really, really cool. Their descendants are squids, octopuses, nautilus. There's about 800 living species of cephalopods on Earth today. So we've gone over the main species that we can find here in the Mingan Archipelago. Would you like to see more fossils?
Of course you want to see more fossils. Is what this is all about. So take us around, show us some cool things, and then we might dive in with questions because I know there's a lot to explore and discover, and you can sort of guide us around as we take some queries. But if there's big ones or main things you want to show us first, we'll dive in with that to kick it off.
All right, let's switch over to our handheld cam right here, Jesse.
Amazing. While she's doing that, I'm just going to note again, if you guys have any questions about any of these things, please do reach out. If you're keen on fossils, I know a lot of you guys are really, really excited about the ancient world, so just let us know. We can find all sorts of resources to keep learning going when this is done. But it looks like we've got Amber, and we are on our way. Hey.
Look at this one right here. This is a big cephalopod. This one is about almost half a meter long. And we can see those minerals in there. Are you able to see that okay?
We certainly can, and I want to highlight for our kids, because this is important, as you've been bringing up some of these fossils and mentioning that some of them are a little bit smaller. Back at this point in world history, there were no creatures that were much bigger than this. 450 million years ago, the biggest creatures are these things. Like, I know nowadays you've got elephants and whales and these other titanic monsters, but back in the day, this would have been like the apex predator on Earth, the equivalent of like a tiger or an orca. Like, it's wild.
Exactly. Here's another example of a cephalopod, and this one's a little bit deceptive that we have up here in the corner because it's spiraled like a gastropod, but it's actually a cephalopod, and you can see that interior structure. I hope I'm not saying anything in double too much because I hear there's a bit of an echo.
Oh, you're good. If you want to go back and mute the camera, we can always do that for a second, and I'll bring myself up if you want to mute that. And then when you're sharing some of the fossils, if you can put your hand up for scale for our students, that would be fantastic.
I can't get any closer than this because I've got a glass between myself and these specimens, but my specimens on the table I can get closer to.
Perfect.
Now, here's a absolutely massive trilobite. This is the biggest one we have in our collection, and it's bigger than my hand, just to give you a bit of an idea. And you can see next to them a little teeny tiny trilobite, and that's about the same size of the one that I showed you earlier. So that is massive. This one up here is also really, really cool because we can see the two sides of the fossil. One side is the actual animal, and the other side is the print that it left in the other side of the rock. Now, if we go over here, we can see some of those sponges a little bit better. They're very rounded, the species we have here. And here we've got even more cephalopods. These are some of my favorite, really beautiful gastropod examples. Here we can see the interior structure of those gastropods. Those brachiopods, we saw them pretty much the same as these ones right here. So I'm going to shift over to our table view right now. And Jesse, we can even move over to questions if you'd like.
Sure. I'd love to bring in our class. We've got so many classes both live and on YouTube. Make sure we get our microphone turned off. There we go. Perfect on our thing. So yeah, guys, we're going to dive in with queries. Miss McGowan's class, I'm going to head to you guys first for questions about the fossils, anything you guys want to know. And of course, you know, sometimes questions on things like this or topics that are this big are kind of tricky. So if we don't get any answers, I'll try and track down the answers for you. But we're going to head to Amber and take your questions. Amber, welcome back into the computer. Miss McGowan's class, Foxford Elementary. Come on in and take us away. Hey, guys. Hey.
What is the oldest fossil to ever exist?
That is an amazing question. Now, our oldest fossil is about 3.5 billion years. So those are much older than the fossils we have here. But the oldest fossil that has been discovered so far, we might discover older ones, are about 3.5 billion years old. And those are fossils of cyanobacteria.
Which is insane, by the way. Like, I know this is a lot of you are in earlier grades, but the Earth itself formed about 4.5 billion years ago. And so at the beginning, Earth was like just a big bowl of lava. That's all it was. And it took millions and millions of years for it to cool. Basically, the moment the Earth cooled and got oceans, life came to be. And we have fossils from pretty close to that period of time, which is insane. So that's one thing that geologists, scientists, paleontologists do all around the world is look for rocks that are various ages, and we look for fossils in them around the globe. So in Canada, we're really lucky to not just have fossils that are 450, 460 million years. We've got animals and other things that are a little bit older than that. Where I am in Newfoundland, we've got tons of dinosaur fossils in Alberta and BC. So we're really lucky to have such a wide breadth of fossils. And I love that question to kick us off, Ms. Miguel. Thanks, guys. All right, our champion waivers, Miss LaForge's class, come on in. Hey.
Hello. How does mineralization work?
Ooh.
That's an excellent question. There's a couple different processes for mineralization, but you need to have, usually it's actually permineralization, which is going to create a lot of our fossils here in the Mingan Archipelago. So this limestone rock is quite porous. So let's say your organism, I'm going to put this shell here, he dies and he's between a layer of sediment, and you've got another layer of sediment that's going to come and cover it really quickly. Now, over many, many thousands of years, that sediment's going to push down and become rock itself. But if that organism is properly covered and we're lucky, it's going to leave a mold. And because this rock is porous, it's like a sponge, so liquid can pass through it. That mineral-rich fluid will pass through the rock into that mold and then harden itself. So that's how we're going to have a lot of that mineralization process happen here in the archipelago.
Yeah. It's such a wild process. Like, I mean, you explained it brilliantly. Actually, that was the best example of that we've ever had on. In terms of the pressure of it, I like to think of it as like blankets. If you put one blanket on you, it feels like a little heavy, and then two blankets, okay, it's getting heavier. Well, imagine over thousands of years, blanket, 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 blanket. It eventually becomes so big, it sort of, the thing that you originally would be disappears, and you end up with just a cast, like nothing inside the rock, that fills with things later. Like, it's such an unlikely process. It's why fossils are so rare in the scheme of things in the world. And I'm so glad we got a chance to take that question. Thanks, guys. All right. I'm talking too much. Westview School, come on in, you guys, and take us away. Hi.
What tools do you use to dig up fossils?
Great question.
I love this question. There are so many different tools that paleontologists and geologists will use to dig up fossils. Here in the archipelago, it's actually pretty cool. Sometimes you don't need any because this limestone is pretty fragile, and often pieces of it will just kind of crack open or crack off, and we can literally walk through our beaches, which are usually stone beaches here in the archipelago. And if you look down at those rocks, those limestone rocks that are on our beaches, you've got a very good chance of finding fossils in them. So here, it's a little bit easy to find fossils, but in other places in the world, you might need to use other types of tools to find these fossils. So different types of hammers and chisels and little brushes and little Dremels to get into all those cracks and crevices, because of course, you don't want to break the fossils. You want to do it in a way that you're going to preserve them as best possible.
What a cool answer, and so different. So our Westview School is joining us in Alberta, one of the great fossil sites in the world, but a lot of your fossils are things that you do need to use heavy-duty tools. You don't just walk around and find chunks of dinosaur lying around. Very often, that would be pretty lucky. So a little bit of diversity here in the fossil approaches. And how lucky you, Amber, to be in a place where you can just walk around and find them. It's like magic. Miss Lou's class, we're going to head to Milton. Come on in, guys, and take us away. Hey.
Hey, was the sponge fossil alive or like a cleaning sponge?
Ooh.
This is a cleaning sponge. So that was just a joke. This is not a fossil. This is a cleaning sponge that came from the store. I just thought it was funny. But the the actual fossils are not alive. So these were alive about 460 million years ago. But this is a synthetic sponge. So a lot of the sponges that we'll buy at the store nowadays are synthetic sponges. So they're made of alternative fibers, but it is still possible to purchase in certain places sponges that are made from real sea sponges.
Yeah, it's where we got the name from, and it's sort of, I'm kind of glad that we use them synthetically nowadays. We got a little bit better material, but I want to harp on sponges for 2 seconds, Amber, because we're way fast in this Q&A. You can take a living sponge, don't do this, but you can run it through a cheese grater, and all the cells will reform and make a sponge. You can't do that with people. If you go through a cheese grater, you do not come back as a person. The sponges can make themselves back up again. It's one of the coolest things in all of nature, and they're really like an underrated organism. So they're very, very neat. Mr. Hancock, I'm going to come to you next. Miss Caillou's class, if you guys want to unmute your mic, I'll come to you as well. We've got some from our YouTube classes, and then everybody, we're going to do a whole second round of this. We are whipping through this awesome Q&A. Georgetown, come on in, Mr. Hancock.
Hey guys. One of our students was wondering, what's your favorite fossil at the museum?
Oh, no pressure.
That is hard. That's really hard. I think my favorite fossil. Can I switch over to the other view camera?
Bring it up.
I'm going to show it to you.
Take
Let me
us on a
switch
journey.
this over right here.
Cool. While she's doing that, my favorite is my megalodon tooth because they are the best. But Amber's back. Let's see. What do we got?
All right. So this right here is a fossil of a cephalopod. And the reason I think it's so cool is because we've got this beautiful mineralization that's happened in part of the fossil. So you've got this really, really cool orange tint that's been caused by different minerals infiltrating with that calcium carbonate. And it's a little bit hard to see on camera right here, but it's very shiny. It's crystal. It's crystallized. So it's really, really pretty, and it just shows how amazing these fossils really are. So that's probably my favorite that I've gotten here by here.
Beauty. Thanks, Amber. We got one from Sarah on YouTube. She wants to know what's the newest fossil you have. So again, what's the period in which you have these fossils in the Mingan Archipelago? What's the deal, and what's our baby fossil, so to speak?
So I'm not sure which one here would be the newest, but the period of fossils that we've got here are from about 460 to 480 million years. But I couldn't tell you which one was at 460 and which one was at 480, for example. But they're all within that 20 million year range. And that might not seem like a lot, but 20 million years is quite a lot of time.
There's no apes on planet Earth 20 million years ago. So the things that are our ancestors look like basic monkeys at that point. 20 million years is about a third as long as it's been since the dinosaurs. So 20 million years ago, we have wild and crazy creatures here on Earth. So that is a very long period of time. When it's that far back and in such a big scale, it seems pretty short, but I'm glad you gave that context. Thanks, Amber.
Just to give a little bit of an idea too, humans started diverging from chimpanzees around 10 million years ago. Yeah. So that's very, very recently compared to these animals that we saw here today.
Fantastic. We're going to head to our second round of questions, guys. YouTubers, keep them coming. We'd love to hear from you, Miss Farquharson, Miss Roberts' class, anyone else, please do share there. But Miss McGowan's class, Fox Run, we're heading back to Texas. Come on in and take us away.
Just wanted to know if do fossils eventually decompose?
Ooh, interesting.
Good question. Hard to know, because if they did, we wouldn't be able to find them anymore. So there's probably fossils that have definitely deteriorated over time, but it'll be hard to know that, let's say in 10 million years time, this sponge right here, if it's going to be in the same condition that it actually is. We'll have to wait a few years and see what's going to happen.
Yeah, we've never had that question in any of our fossil programs before. But yes, I mean, the answer would have to be yes, that some fossils do degrade over time or conditions change that sort of destroys them. I mean, if you're a fossil and you're in a plate and another plate goes on top of you, you just melt, like it would basically become lava. So that fossil disappears that way. But it does speak to this point, too, that like fossilization is insanely rare. As you said, something basically has to die, get buried, and then get more buried for like eons to come, and then maybe stuff percolates through the rock to make a fossil out of it. Like, it's such an unlikely process. I heard it described as if every person in the world were to die today, we'd have about 10 human fossils. Like, that's it. Out of every person on Earth, which is insane because there's 8 billion of us. So, you know, hard to know, but that's a really cool question. Thanks, man.
It's a really good question. It could also, I mean, as far as degradation goes, I'll show you the cephalopod again. I've seen some degradation myself with this fossil because unfortunately a piece of it broke off. So this little piece here used to be a little bit longer, and because it's so fragile and so thin, a piece of it broke off. So that's also a way that a fossil can degrade, is they break, they're fragile.
I'm trying to pull up 2 names really quick before I go to Miss LaForge's class. I want our classes to look this up, and if I put them on the screen, you'll be able to find them. Borealopelta is an organism that was found a few years back that is just like one of the coolest fossils of all time. So if you want to see a fossil that's the exact opposite of degraded and is like insanely perfect, check that out. And Trilobites, we featured a few today. Check out Moroccan Trilobite fossils, which are really just some of the most special things on planet Earth. They're featured in quite a few museums now globally, but just a neat plug if you want a little extra time when you're done today. Miss LaForge's class, we're heading back to you. Come on in and take us away, guys.
Hey, what's the biggest fossil?
Ooh, the biggest one you have, Amber, and great coat, by the way.
The biggest one I have right here with me right now, as far as length goes, would be that cephalopod that I showed you a little bit earlier. The biggest, probably single organism is that trilobite behind me.
Okay.
But my biggest one that I can actually pick up is this one, because I can't pick up much bigger than this one. It's pretty heavy. But the fossil in the stone is actually only about a quarter or a fifth of the stone substrate that we have here. This is the biggest one that I can actually pick up. I need to lift some more fossils to get my muscles going.
Little weightlifting in our broadcast today. Well, I'm glad you actually highlighted that, because a lot of fossils, when they take them out of the wild, so to speak, they have a matrix around them. They don't just chip out the fossil out in the field. They'll take a big plate, and then if they want to extract something like a dinosaur fossil, say, they'll chip away that last little bit of stone for sometimes years on end afterwards to make sure they're preserving it as best as possible. So very cool plug. And yeah, our cephalopod's about yay big, Amber. It was through the glass. It's about a few feet.
Through the glass, it's about this big.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. Westview School, back to Miss Smith's class. Come on in, guys.
How long does it take to find fossils?
Ooh, so if you're going out to find them.
Cool question. Here in the archipelago, it can take no time at all, because if you're lucky and you look down when you're walking in the limestone, you might just see one right there. So it could take 5 seconds. It could also take 20 minutes, depending on which area of the archipelago you're in. If you've got a lot of limestone that's fractured off before. Here in the Mingan Archipelago, we're famous for our fossils, but we're also famous for our monoliths, which are these huge structures made of limestone. And they're made of thousands and thousands and thousands of different layers of that limestone. But as little pieces fall off, because it's fragile, we can find fossils in those. So obviously we don't want to chip away at those on purpose, but sometimes when that limestone breaks off in different areas, we're going to be able to find different fossils in them.
2 quick notes in this. One is that, it takes 20 minutes to find a fossil at its most. Lucky you. Very few places in the world are like that. And 2, on the monolith note, is if you look up the place where Amber is right now, that's the main thing that pops up alongside the fossils. You shared a little, like a model of one. How big are those monoliths for the scale for our kids?
Our biggest one, I believe, is 9 meters.
So like 25 feet, 28 feet, 30 feet for our American friends. Like these
Very
are big stone pillars that are everywhere where Amber is. So it's a really lucky spot in the world to be.
If you'd like, I can show you a little picture here in our visitor center of kind of what those look like with people next to them.
Nice.
These are just photos, of course, but it gives you a bit of a perspective on how big these are.
And I'm not mistaken, this is a fairly new visitor center, yes?
At least 20 years old.
Oh, never mind. I'm messed up with something else. I take it back. Amber, well, thank you for sharing some of those pictures. And we're going to take just a few more questions before we wrap up. Time flies and you're having fun, folks. But please do reach out if you have any more fossil questions. If we can't get your question answered live today, Amber and I will happily answer after the fact. And anything else you're keen on with the ancient world, it's always a very fun topic. But Miss Lou, we're heading to you, and then Mr. Hancock will wrap up with you in a minute. Come on in and open, guys. Hey.
What is the oldest fossil you have?
Ooh, oldest one. Superlative.
The oldest one that we have would be around the 480 million year mark.
Yeah. And
but
again,
like I said, go ahead, Jesse.
No. Talk to me.
Like I said earlier, I couldn't tell you which one. I couldn't tell you if this gastropod, for example, is a year older than this coral right here, because I don't have the information that specifically on dating them. We are able to date them usually within a couple million years of each other. So I couldn't tell you which one was a few days or a few months older, for example. I wouldn't be able to go into that much detail, unfortunately. I'd love to, but don't have that information.
We've got a lot of grade 3 through 6s today, and so it's going to be a few years in school before you learn this, but I'm going to put a topic on your mind right now. Radiometric dating, which is one of the coolest things ever in the history of science. The fact that we can find an arrowhead or a fossil or any number of things and date it using elements is like black magic. It's incredible. It's opened up so many forms of scientific inquiry. So if you want a really cool topic to look into in the future, I really can't encourage you with that enough. Mr. Hancock, we're going to wrap up with you guys in one quick second. I just want to note for all our audience, this is on our YouTube channel. So if you want to catch it again, share with family and friends, go there, check out our cross-Canada virtual road trip classes. I'm going to be sending you a survey in a minute as well, where you can win some really cool prizes from our friends at Canadian Geographic Education just by participating. So stay tuned for that email as well. But before we wrap up, Mr. Hancock, take us away.
Yeah, we had a student who was wondering about identifying and dating them, but thank you for answering that. I'll end off with my favorite question, going back to the dino DNA in Jurassic Park. Could we and should we? Going back.
Could we? I'm not sure. Should we? I'm also not sure.
It's a nuanced question, right? So we can't get DNA from dinosaurs. We can get DNA from things that existed 10, 20,000 years ago, which is wild. So in theory, we could bring back something like a woolly mammoth. That is actually within the technical capacity of man. Should we is a very different question. I'm of the no camp. And a lot of people are very much of the yes thing, but we can't actually bring back dinosaurs. The DNA does not survive. So the code that we would need to build something like that no longer exists. However, Amber, you mentioned something earlier, and I want to harp on this for a second. Sometimes soft tissue is preserved. Like, it's wild with fossils that are hundreds of millions of years old. Sometimes we can tell what color they were or see things like feathers. And if you want to speak to that for a second, that would be lovely. Oh, did we freeze? Amber, are you back? Maybe. I think you might be entirely frozen with him. What timing for it as we wrap up the broadcast? She literally just disappeared. Well, folks, thank you so much for that great Q&A to wrap us up. If you are keen on more things to do with dino DNA, Jurassic Parky things, just let me know and I can get you some more information, Mr. Hancock. But classes, I'm going to say a big thank you and farewell for your time today, your enthusiasm, everything. I know Amber's not here with us, ironically enough, but I'm going to bring in all our classes to say thank you and farewell to her. So, Ms. LaForge, Ms. McGowan, Weston, everybody have a wonderful day. All Amber's back to say farewell. Bye. Have a wonderful time.